Make sure that that's working. Okay, and the stream is working, and we should see it show up here in a second. All right, good. So we've got audio and video, and I'm going to cue the music, and we're going to start our new career in podcasting. Does that sound familiar?
It sounds familiar. Hey, everybody, this is the inaugural broadcast of 914 Wired. The three of us who founded this podcast. First of all, I want to thank Charlie Stern, who's our technology guy, our crypto guy, and a very, very organized man who's put this podcast together for us. Our other co-host is Ardina Seward. Ardina, for those who are unaware, and most of you probably are unaware, Ardina was the first African-American camera woman to work for a TV network in U.S. history. And she was at ABC Network and ABC Local throughout a long and prosperous news career. My name is Peter Moses. I used to be a New York Post reporter. Before that, I was a jazz critic for Gannett News Service, and I went into TV news as a producer because I'm too ugly to be on camera. And that's been my career. And we were on a radio station called WVOX AM in New Rochelle, New York, for 13 years, and they went out of business last week. They turned off the signal, and so Charlie very quickly pivoted, and Ardina and I went along with the ride, and Ardina also came up with the logo, and we decided to go with 914 Wired because it has more of an edge. It's a new podcast. It's a new format. And we wanted to start something fresh and new. The fact that we're starting it on September 11th is either an impropitious date or it's a good date. I'm going to assume it's a
impropitious. You need to tell me what that even means.
A bad day because of what it's a reminder of.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
You're the Ivy. You went to a.
No, I don't. I don't have the Ivy.
Ardina knows.
I don't have the.
And Joe Pinion knows what impropitious means.
Right. Because they have Ivy backgrounds.
Yes. And I take Ivy off my walls. Anyway, so we have with us today, our inaugural guest is Joe Pinion, who, if you live in New York State, I'm sure you remember him because he went up against, in the Senate race in New York State for the U.S. Senate, Chuck Schumer. And people were discounting Joe as somewhat of a novice. And he garnered 43% of the vote when he raised a little over $500,000, and Schumer raised, I think, $35 million in that race, and yet you garnered 43% of the vote. Those of you who do know Joe Pinion's name beyond New York State, for some time he had a broadcast on Newsmax called Saturday Alert, right?
Saturday Agenda.
Saturday Agenda. I'm sorry. I'm 67 years old. I make mistakes.
We'll keep the people alert here on the podcast.
So what is Joe Pinion doing now?
Well, look, I think, the first step in the aftermath of any campaign, I think, is restoring your sanity and reconnecting with your family. Look, it's a humbling experience to be able to put my name forth, to have received the vote and support of over 2.5 million New Yorkers. It is an honor I will carry with me for the rest of my life. But I think at the same time, it is certainly, in many ways, an endeavor that takes a lot out of you personally. It takes you away from your family, traveling the state. And so I spent at least the good part of this year just reintroducing myself to my dog and my loved ones so that they actually knew who was walking through the door. And then beyond that, I have begun to engage again in journalism and TV media, as well as working on some opportunities in the private sector. And we're actually getting ready to launch a 501c4 in the coming weeks to help continue advocating for some of the issues that we were able to talk about during the campaign.
Can you describe your politics? You run Newsmax, that is a decidedly right-wing television network. You've also been a guest on CNN, which is not. So where do you fall
Well, look,
politically?
the way I look at it is, for me, I view politics in a very specific and deliberative approach. For me, it's very simple that we're a four-party nation that is trapped in a two-party system. I'm a Republican. I've been a teenage Republican, a college Republican. I'm now an old young Republican. But I think for me, there's never been more agreement amongst the people in America on what is going wrong for the American people. And so while it is, I think, profitable for the networks, and I say that as somebody who is on all the networks, to focus on the wedge issues that keep Americans at each other's throats, when you're looking at the state of our educational system, there's never been more agreement that our children are not being given the tools they need to become the best version of themselves. When you look at the state of Main Street, it is quite clear that we have Americans working harder and harder for less. When you look at the state of people trying to have economic productivity and prosperity, it is quite clear that we have a wage gap that continues to widen. That has allowed, in many ways, the American dream to slip away. And when you look at just everyday realities of people trying to figure out if their children are going to inherit an America that is better off than the one that they inherited, whether you're looking at the issues on the southern border, whether you're looking at the drug crisis, whether you're looking at poverty, or whether you're looking at any number of the issues that keep people awake at night, we do not have the
Go ahead,
stewardship
Ardina.
Go ahead, Ardina.
that is actually going to get people what they need moving forward.
Okay, but they are. I have a two-part question, Joe. Why did you, should I say, gravitate towards the Republican Party, number one? And number two, do you find now that in this particular election cycle, you have a lot of conservative Democrats who are migrating to the other side?
Well, look, I think in two parts. For me, I've always viewed political parties as kind of the rental car that gets you from point A to point B. The issue is, can the car get you where you're trying to go? And when I look at the two parties, I see in a Democratic Party, perhaps a party where I agree on, maybe 65 to 70% of the objectives, but I only agree with about 25 to 30% of the methodologies. Conversely, I see a Republican Party.
Yeah.
What does that mean? That's very pretty language. What does that mean?
I want to understand that metaphor. No. I need to. Go ahead.
Well, specifically, what it means is that, yes, we can all want to say that we want our children to get the best education possible. That is the objective. The methodology is, what are the processes that we put in place to achieve that end? And so for me, as it relates to education, I believe that this is no longer theoretical. We have over 40 to 60 years of data that shows us what we need to do to help children get better educational outcomes, specifically as it relates to children who are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. We know that longer school days work. We know that being able to ensure that there is some sense of school choice also does work, right? So that is, again, an objective that I would say both Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives agree on, giving our children a better education, while at the same time, if you're talking about what is the method to achieve that outcome, there is a wide variety of disagreement. And I think issue by issue, as you go through the core issues that maintain the core pillars of my political ambitions and also my social consciousness, the issues that I'm most passionate about, I find myself more in agreement with people who are center-right about what are the best methods for us to achieve that more perfect union that Americans are seeking.
Ardina, you had a second part.
Point,
Okay, but how do you convince people of that without sort of taking the sting out of the Republican agenda? And I don't mean that in a harsh sense. I just mean that when you talk to liberals, when you talk to progressives, there's this kind of wall against Republicans. But a lot of what you're saying makes perfect sense because you're talking about common denominator issues. So how do you get people to listen to the Republican platform, your platform, without them putting up this protest, if you will? No, that's a Republican agenda.
Well, look, I think John McCain said it best. No one No one cares about what you know until they know that you care. You look at somebody like Malcolm X, who famously said that sincerity is my chief credential. And so I think that in the aggregate, Republicans have to do a better job of demonstrating a true sense of sincerity when it comes to the outrage that we have on issues. If people don't actually believe that you are sincere in your concerns about their communities and their future, they're never going to listen to the policies you're espousing, even if, statistically speaking, those policies are going to be an improvement on the current conditions that they're experiencing.
Okay.
I think for me personally, when I engage in politics, it's simply about saying, look, what are you trying to achieve? And also, if there's disagreement, what exactly about what I am saying do you not like? What is it about what I am saying that you are so offended by?
Mm-hmm.
And what ends up happening is that you end up forcing people to realize that they're more upset about the banner under which you're standing than they are with the words that are coming out of your own mouth. And so I think that,
But Joe, here's
ahead.
why I need to kind of back up a little bit to something you said a few minutes ago. That metaphor you used about that the party is a rental car to get where you want to go.
Correct.
We've got a few rental cars. There's Hertz and there's Avis, and they're all basically selling something extremely similar, and yet they coexist, right? And then to kind of extend that metaphor to politics, it raises some serious questions because just to kind of back out and come back in a little bit, I just read this book called On Tyranny. The author's name is Timothy Snyder. He's a professor from Yale. And what the guy was saying is basically one of the lessons of the 20th century is if you don't want tyranny, you want a healthy dual party system. You don't want one party having dominance over the other party for a whole variety of things that can go really wrong.
Like fairness.
It just democracy unravels when
Yes.
you don't have a multi. So you want, if you're a Democrat, you want a healthy Republican Party. The problem is if the Republican Party is dominated by a regime that is committed to authoritarian principles and denying the outcome of elections and really no centeredness in facts or respect for truth or any of that stuff, you can't support that. So how do you square off with that, and how do you distance yourself from it?
Well, look, I think that there's a lot packed into that. I think first and foremost, I think we have this what I call gross oversimplification of the state of the Republican Party and gross denialism as to the health of the Democratic Party. I think that most people in a kind of this past 30,000-foot view would say that there is a trend towards populism and authoritarianism that is alive and well within both parties. The manner in which it is articulated in both parties differs. And I think that if you're talking about the political sensibilities of those who occupy the space in polite society, they have basically rubber stamped what I've called this kind of socially acceptable authoritarianism, right? This notion where I can show up on a major television network and it is perfectly acceptable to declare that 40% of the American people are in a political cult with zero sense of how that prejudices the audience, how that is clearly not in keeping with journalistic best practices, and yet somehow it happens perpetually every single day. So
Wait. Before I can't let that go on, Ardina. I think how. What did he just? I got lost.
Yeah, play that one back, Joe.
Look, my point is quite clear.
Oh,
right?
no, I know what I wanted to say. People who are doing news stories on the various cable networks are supposed to adhere to journalistic principles. What you're talking about, the accusations that 40% are not coming from reporters on these networks. They're coming from people who are paid to give their opinions, and they're entitled to their opinions.
I would say this. Certainly, it does come from the opinion givers, the pundits, as you say. It also does come from people who use this patina of even-handedness to then effectively try to skirt around the fact that they're not being even-handed in their approach. And I could give a multitude of examples of me being behind that desk. And it's happened on multiple networks.
Have you done it, by the way? When you had your own show, did you adhere to those journalistic principles all the time, or did you give your opinion?
Well, look, for the reality is, yeah, from my show, I was the host of Saturday Agenda. It was an opinion show, it was labeled
Okay.
as such. I was expected to give my opinion.
So
The
you didn't have
again,
to adhere to journalistic principles that you want others.
I think
Okay.
that you have a responsibility when you sit behind that desk to be transparent about your purpose, your objective, and what is the scope of the show.
Okay.
The scope of the show was that I was there to give my opinion. I was also there to walk people through the facts, and in that sense, it was my responsibility to make sure that all the facts that were being presented during the 2 hours that I was on air every single week were accurate. My interpretation of those facts certainly are colored by my political perspective, but that notwithstanding, the facts that are presented can and should always be done so in the most forthright manner. My concern is that that level of attentiveness, what I call the actual scope or demand for context, is not equal. That as we have these conversations about even the legal troubles of President Trump, and even if you talk about how we approach the stories about President Trump, the demand for specificity of language, the demand for the type of context that we require of anyone providing analysis of President Trump is not the same demand for context and continuity what is on the other side. And we have created a scenario where people do not know who to trust. They do not know the actual full scale of the ideas.
So
And that
wait,
has
no,
been
I know. Wait. So you really believe that are you tacitly implying that Trump is being
Railroaded?
inappropriately prosecuted in the media?
I think you're missing the point. The issue that we're dealing with right now is that we do not have an honest fourth estate. I think that is completely true. I think that if you look at what's happened with President Trump, many of the legal issues that he's facing right now, I would firmly and completely say he brought on himself. That in and of itself has very little to do with the approach that has been taken to covering these cases.
And how did wait a second. How did this start? This did not start with MSNBC. Wait, no. Let me ask my question, please.
We're kind of in the weeds here because we're bound to we
But
started off with a
Joe,
question
this
about
started with
Fox.
Fox News.
Well, hold on. Again, respectfully, the question was about my approach to politics and how do we get people to understand.
And then you
what your ideas
rejiggered the
are.
conversation.
And but no, I don't think I did. I think that we ended up in a bunch of in a subsequent series of sub questions that got us to the point where now I'm having a conversation about this all started with Fox News and President Trump. So I just, again, I want to be respectful, but we can go down the rabbit hole on any one of these issues and have a 45-minute conversation. But I don't want to get lost in the weeds where I'm constantly, effectively trying to defend the last point
That's
I made
fine.
on it.
So then let's level set. Let's level set and say what will sort of level this off. What would be a more fair application of media to the current political climate, in your opinion?
Well, look. I put it this way. I work in journalism every single day, right? And when I say that, I mean that it's what we're saying when we're on air. It's also the comments that people make when we no longer have a hot mic. And what I'm saying is that people are not getting a true, even-handed portrayal of the facts, right? I'll use one example. I'm not to put names out there, right? But if we're going to sit here and have an honest conversation, really predicated on no actual evidence other than, hearsay, that somehow President Trump engaged in a cover-up with the person who was in charge of the pool to try to flood the equipment room, to try to damage information, which upon further evaluation, nothing actually occurred, but the flood did occur. You start to get to the point where where is the basis as a journalist to say what is going to be presented to the American people? Because if you're discussing a flood where no damage occurred, you're starting to get to the point where, okay, great. If that's the standard, that's fine. But I'll have a conversation with that same journalist about the fact that I've got, literally no less than 4 different whistleblower reports about what's going on with President Biden when he was vice president, and they will pretend that there is not enough evidence there for us to have a conversation with it on national television. I would say that, again, that's a real problem when you're talking about what is the standard being established by a network for us to have conversations. So I think, again, obviously, again, President Trump being a lightning rod for controversy on both sides of the aisle, either you hate him or you love him. All the things with President Biden and his family, whether you believe it or not, a lightning rod on both sides of the aisle.
Mhm.
But this, again, goes back to my original comment when we started this conversation about saying that we will get lost in this conversation about things that people cannot agree on. Meanwhile, the things that we actually can agree on don't actually get any oxygen. And that happens every single day in this country.
Yeah, and I
which
could
is
connect with
why
that
the
statement.
country, in my
Ardina
humble
wanted
opinion,
to say something.
is in the state that we're in.
I think Joe makes an important point, because let's take, for example, the comparison between American media and the BBC. It's a world of difference. I'm not saying that the BBC is perfect, but I'm saying that the BBC's standards for debate and for news are very different from the American media. The American media revels in inflammatory rhetoric on both sides. Why? Because it sells advertising. Why? Because it brings audiences. Why? Because it gives. Therefore, you have more revenue. So a lot of the so-called objective broadcast standards are lowered or even wiped away for the sake of getting viewers. Now, I'm not saying that because I'm either pro-Trump, anti-Trump, or pro-Biden or anti-Biden. I'm only saying that as a casual observer. That there's, if you watch TV news, there's a lot of fire and brimstone, and the more emotional people are, the more so-called irrational they are, then the more viewers there are. You will read in the morning after analysis of a debate, so and so and so and so newscaster. Did you hear what they said? Did you hear what they said? Did you see the reaction of the person that they were talking to? It's not about the content.
But the reaction.
It's about the
But the
reaction.
reaction. So,
And
Joe,
look, I'll just say this, right? Even if you look at something, very basic, right? I remember the day last month when it was basically announced by Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin that they were going to start treating all ships, including grain ships, trying to enter those ports into Ukraine as hostile and threatened to blow them up, right? For me, that is no less than the modern day equivalent of a Cuban Missile level crisis we have there on the Baltic Sea. And the lead story was us again talking about the court dates for President Trump.
I will say this: Joe does make his point. He put something behind it. Now, this relates, but I didn't want to finish up without mentioning this because it's directly a Joe Pinion story. You were successful in 2022 against Chuck Schumer at getting 43% of the vote in a general election for United States Senate from New York. I don't remember hearing all that much about that. And of course, in politics, winner takes all. You didn't win, and that's okay. But you, I think, arguably had a very successful run for the United States Senate. I really didn't hear about it very much at all. And to Peter's point, you were outspent, what, 10-1?
Much more than that.
Put it this way,
Almost 100 to 1.
I mean, you look.
So why is that, Joe? Why is that?
Well, look, I'll say this, and this goes back to my idea about what is the standard for journalism and for context, right? And it's a lot easier to understand when you take somebody like Trump out of the equation. I ran for U.S. Senate in New York. I didn't run to be a historical figure, but at the end of the day, I was the first black person ever nominated for U.S. Senate in the history of New York State by either party. If you ran a poll of the amount of people who read the New York Times on a daily basis who knew about our campaign prior to the debate that we had with Chuck Schumer, it probably would have been very little. But that's because the people that are in control of the editorial at the New York Times pretended the election was not happening. Right. We would go to Buffalo and have press conferences where every major press organization in Buffalo would be present. And then you would open up the newspapers the next day, and it was as if we had never come to town.
Right.
And so there,
That's real.
again, when we talk about the reality of what's going on in journalism, look, we can talk about it in the context of what just happened with WVOX, with the reality being that investigative journalism costs money, that smaller radio stations are under more financial pressure than ever before, that in this world that has become more about clicks and more about larger conglomerates, that the local news goes and falls through the cracks. But even with real major news, again, a U.S. Senate race against the Senate Majority Leader for the nation, who is vying to become the longest-serving senator in the history of New York State, it is failure by design in some cases, where the media has gone out of their way to pretend that something is not newsworthy in order to place their thumb on the scale and ensure a particular outcome, that outcome being Chuck Schumer staying exactly where he was. So it will be impossible for me to have anyone convince me that it was not a deliberate attempt by specific individuals in newsrooms all across this country, be it the traditional printed press, or be it somebody out there and other NORs to try to make sure that the word didn't get out there. We were successful because we brought the message directly to the people. We went door to door, we went city to city in a way that was undeniable, in a way that I just don't think they realized was going to be as effective.
I think that part's very, very true, and I know that Ardina, Charles, and I have to agree on that point with you, Joe.
Right.
Joe, we're gonna have to. We've taken up enough of your time. I know you had a specific amount of time in mind.
Joe's actually at a 9/11 event today. I think it's wise for us to leave off on that note. It's a sad day. We all remember where we were 22 years ago, right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And
we remind people that 19 madmen brought this nation to its knees. And so I know sometimes in the political fisticuffs, we can talk about terrorism or safety in the aggregate. It just seems like bombast. But
you know what? I think the opposite. I don't think 19 cowards brought the nation to its knees. I think 19 cowards brought the country to its feet. I think that after 9/11, things have changed.
Well, certainly, yeah.
I don't agree. I don't agree.
I put it this way: first, there was the grief, the shock, the horror, and then after that, the unity that we all celebrate on the days where we remember that eternal phrase, "Never forget,"
and which has fallen away in years. Which has fallen away in years since.
But it'll be back.
It'll be back.
So you're listening to 914 Wired, new podcast which we've converted from
Tell your friends.
a former radio show. Then, Peter, we didn't mention this, but apparently AM radio doesn't work well in EV cars.
Doesn't work at all.
On top of all the other problems we have in our society, you can't get AM radio in a Tesla. And that's causing problems all over this country. But we're doing something about it because we, in this little group here, and I know I speak for Joe too, we believe in local radio and local media and news commentary. So 914 Wired, 914wired.com. You can start to pick it up in the podcast directories. I want to thank everybody for coming in here. Joe Pinion, thank you for being our inaugural guest.
No problem. Thanks
All
for
right.
having me.
Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, Ardina.